All right. So we're just kicking off here. We're getting started here, just about right on time. So my name is Michael Carlo. I run the website PowerBI.tips. I'm here with my my buddy Daniel, who has made this amazing program, Tabular Editor. It's a super elegant program that helps you modify tabular models. Does some incredible things. If you've been modeling in Power BI like I have for pretty much since it came out, you've learned how hard sometimes it is to move around the Power BI program and model Power BI data models. So as we think about how this is all working, there's some really interesting code happening behind the scenes, and Daniel's going to kind of walk us through what his program can do and how it helps you edit and modify analysis services and can read that information. So I'm going to transition my video over to Daniel here, and go ahead, take it away, Daniel.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm really glad to have had this opportunity to talk to you all today, and over the next couple of days, we'll have these follow-up webinars. So we'll start off today with an introduction to Tabular Editor. I'll tell you a little bit about what it is, setting the expectations straight, and then of course I'll show you a demo of what it can do. Specifically, when working with Power BI, you'll see what it actually enables you to do, and why you would choose it over the standard tool in Power BI Desktop. I'll make sure to take a couple of breaks along the way to follow up on any questions that you guys have, and Mike will help me moderate that. So with that out of the way, here we go. So first of all, yeah, my name is Daniel. I work as a principal architect at a Danish company called Capacity. We deal primarily with Microsoft Business Analytics. And yeah, so Power BI is one of the natural things that we deal with a lot. I was awarded the Microsoft Data Platform MVP back in December last year. And yeah, what else? I've been working with the Microsoft Business Intelligence stack for a little over 12 years. So I started my career in business intelligence working with analysis services multidimensional. And then around 10 years ago, when analysis services Tabular started to show up, first in Excel Power Pivot, and then in Power View, and then, as you know, in analysis services Tabular, and finally today in Power BI. That's sort of where my main interest is today. On the side, I've been working as a hobby programmer, doing some stuff in C# and .NET for a little over 15 years. And yeah, I created Tabular Editor, which is the tool that you guys are here today to hear about. Last year, I got involved in something called the Power BI Contributor Program. This is a program that Amir Netz invented for Power BI customers who are interested in actually joining and sort of being able to you know, contribute to the features that gets put into Power BI Desktop. And my involvement was actually announced publicly for the first time last week on Thursday. I don't know if some of you guys saw, but Christian Wade actually presented this amazing little webinar last Thursday, where he showed off this new feature in Power BI Desktop called External Tools. I'll also show you some of that today, where you get this little new ribbon button inside Desktop that actually lets you launch tools like Tabular Editor and other tools directly from inside Power BI Desktop. And this little ribbon inside Desktop was actually my contribution to Power BI Desktop, something that I'm actually incredibly proud that I had the opportunity to help out on and build. And hopefully, given the opportunity, more exciting things will come going forward. So, what exactly is Tabular Editor? Well, it actually started out almost 4 years ago when I was working with a client on SQL Server 2016. They had this huge analysis services tabular model built, which had maybe a couple of hundred tables and thousands of measures. And one day they asked me to go and reorganize all of these measures in various display folders. And considering that this model had 1,000 measures or something like that, I quickly estimated that using the standard tool available back then, SSDT or Visual Studio as it's also called, This would probably have taken me 2 weeks to go through all 1,000 measures one by one and edit the display folder string. This is quite similar to how you can assign display folders to measures within your Power BI models, except that this tool was possibly even worse when working with large models than Power BI Desktop is, even less responsive. And so I pretty soon figured that I had to do something else. This was just never going to work. And that's when I invented Tabular Editor. In fact, the very first version of Tabular Editor only allowed you to edit the display folders of measures. And it did so by just displaying all of the measures of your model in a hierarchical tree, and then letting you drag and drop multiple objects between various folders. That was the only functionality the very first version of the tool had. But then I quickly realized, of course, because after I spent probably 3 or 4 hours creating this tool back then, and then it took me maybe 10 minutes to solve the customer request in this case, which would otherwise have taken me weeks. And then I quickly realized that, hey, why stop there? I mean, why not letting this tool edit any object and any object property of the tabular model, and not just the display folder or measures? And the rest is basically history. That's where we are today, with the Tabular Editor being this offline editor that can load your tabular model metadata and let you make any change that you want, and let you do it lightning fast, as you'll see in a bit. Now, the reason I keep saying analysis services, and why is this at all relevant to Power BI? Well, the thing is, as some of you may know, Power BI is actually running analysis services under the hood. So first of all, for those of you running Power BI Premium, you can already today enable the so-called XMLA write endpoint, which lets you connect your Tabular Editor download directly to this XMLA endpoint and make any change you want in the Power BI datasets that you already published. But very soon you will also be able to use Tabular Editor to make certain kind of changes directly within Power BI Desktop while Desktop is running. Because the thing is, once you open up Power BI Desktop on your machine, you actually spin up an instance of analysis services as well, or Power BI Desktop does that for you and runs that under the hood. So whenever you're running Desktop on your machine, an instance of analysis services is also running, and that's the instance that Tabular Editor can connect to, and you'll see that in a bit. So for those of you that have some experience with analysis services, you can see I put here in the slide that this only works with SQL Server 2016 or newer. And the reason for that is that at that point in time, Microsoft changed the very metadata model of tabular models. Initially, they were using some XML-based format called XMLA, and that's actually where the XMLA name of the XMLA endpoint comes from. But they changed that up, so now everything is JSON instead of XML. So if you've ever looked at a Power BI template file, so some of you that are a little interested in hacking stuff have probably tried to take a Power BI template file that you can produce from inside Desktop and just unzip it. So let's just do that here. And then the interesting thing is that what's inside this file, you'll see that there are a couple of files inside the zip file. And one of them is called the data model schema. Now, if we open up this file in a text editor, you'll see here that this file is actually just a huge, for some reason the encoding here doesn't really work, so that's a very bad example. Let me just quickly do something like this. See how that works. Not even sure I can do that. Okay, here we go. So it actually managed to re-encode the file here, as you see. So you see that this is actually just a JSON document, and this document actually describes everything regarding the data model within your Power BI Desktop file. So in this JSON document, we'll see a list of all the tables that are in the model, all the columns within each table, all the measures, and so on. We'll see the DAX expression. For example, if I search for expression, we'll see here that so here's an expression that uses the year DAX function of a date column, and you'll see some other stuff in here. And actually, what Tabular Editor is, it's basically just an editor or a UI on top of this JSON file. So it just loads all of this JSON data presents it in a nice UI that lets you easily work with all of the objects inside this JSON file, and that's all it does basically. Well, that's not entirely true, because there are some other interesting features in there as well, and you'll see those in a bit. But this is just for you to understand what's actually going on here. And in fact, some guy actually told me at Past Summit a couple of years ago. So it's basically just a flashy JSON editor, and that's why I showed you this stuff, because that's actually just what it is. For those of you that have done some programming in C#, I can inform that this is a so-called WinForms application. So this is actually very old school technology. I believe the WinForms stack is incredibly old, and I believe it saw the light of day back in when Windows 3.1 hit the market. So
really old.
Like a 20-year-old technology. I've built the UI in Tableau Editor, but it's still completely supported by Microsoft, and they still provide new versions with each update to the .NET framework. There's some new additions to WinForms. So even though it has 30 years old, it just still works. And in my opinion, it's the most rapid framework for building stuff like this. So that's why I stuck to use it. Also for people that are not super exceptionally experienced programmers, I kind of find that WinForms is sort of the easiest platform to go into when you want to build applications like this. So yeah. All right, next slide here. I'm just going to skip over a couple of these, not spend too long. So yeah, as I mentioned before, Tableau Editor was actually designed for analysis services, but because desktop and the Power BI service is running analysis services under the hood, we are going to get some exciting new features here that Tableau Editor will show its worth also to folks that are used to working with Power BI. So as I write here, for Power BI Desktop, please keep in mind that today it's still unsupported, meaning that Power BI Tableau Editor will actually allow you to make changes to a Power BI Desktop model, but it's not supported by Microsoft right now, meaning that if you make any changes that break your PBIX file, Microsoft will not help you, or Microsoft support will not help you solve this issue. So if you decide you want to experiment a little bit with this as of today, please make sure to keep a backup of your PBIX or PBIT files, just so you don't lose any work if things break. Now, a couple of months from now, we expect that some of the stuff that I've been working on in the contributor program will become available. And at that point, we will have full support for certain types of changes, meaning stuff like measures, calculation groups, perspectives. Some of that stuff will actually be fully supported. So at that point, you can safely use Tableau Editor to make changes directly to your Power BI desktop model, and it will be in a fully supported way. And finally, for those of you running Power BI Premium, you can already today use Tableau Editor to connect to the XML endpoint of your datasets in Power BI Premium and make any kind of change you want. And the reason why this is fully supported is because, again, under the hood, in a Power BI dataset that has been deployed to the service, any kind of change you can make is actually fully supported by the service, since it's just analysis services. So yeah, so good news for those of you running Power BI Premium. For those of you that do not use Power BI Premium, we'll have to have a little more patience until we get the last couple of things available in desktop. So why would you even use Tableau Editor? Well, I'm not going to go over all of this in detail, but hopefully you'll see in a bit once I start the demo, and hopefully I'll be able to convince you why you should use Tableau Editor for certain kind of stuff. There is a catch though, and the primary catch is that it's probably not that well suited of a tool for people who are new to Tableau modeling. So if this is your very first Power BI model that you're working on, and you're not that experienced with DAX and how to create, relationships between tables, and if you don't really know what the difference is between a calculated column and a measure, well, then this tool is probably not for you. In that case, I suggest you stick to Power BI Desktop. You get to learn the tool. You get a feel for modeling within Power BI. All of that stuff. You learn some basic DAX, and then at that point, once you start to get sufficiently frustrated with how difficult it can sometimes be to, when you create a new measure, it takes a couple of seconds while they're working on it. They're always working on it, the little spinner in there. And at that point, you will probably appreciate much better what Tabular Editor does and what it allows you to do. Right. So with that out of the way, let's go and see what Tabular Editor is. That's a slide here. I'm pretty sure, Mike, we can probably arrange for these slides to be shared
Sure.
afterwards.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah.
And if you wouldn't mind, can you go into presentation mode for your slides? That way it gets just a tad bit bigger, and I'll make them big on the video as well. Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much.
So some of the stuff that I'm going to show you today is primarily around the Tabular Object Model Explorer tree, as I call it. This is a hierarchical view of the JSON metadata that we saw before. We'll see it nicely arranged into this tree, where everything can be dragged and dropped around. You can multi-select objects. You can even copy-paste objects around. And whenever you make a change and you decide you want to go back, well, you can just hit Control-Z and undo the change you made. As far as I know, within Power BI Desktop, it's not possible to undo changes today, except on the report designer. So on the visual pane, if you make a change to your visual, I guess you can undo that. But if you make a change to any of your to the data model by adding new measures or modifying the DAX expression of a calculated column, something like that, I believe that's not possible to undo today. But within Tabular Editor, everything is completely undoable. So before I go over to the demo, I'll just like to ask Mike, are there any questions or anything along the way that we should pick up at this point?
Great break point there. Everyone's been very excited to be here. We've got people from the Ukraine, we have people in Minnesota. A lot of people are asking about the recording. When can we get it, and how do we get our hands on it? So stay tuned. Daniel and I will work hard to get this recording edited down and put out. So we will be on the Power BI Tips YouTube channel, so you'll be able to see it come up there. If you're not a subscriber, make sure you go over to YouTube, so look for Power BI Tips, and go ahead and subscribe to us. You'll get the notifications. It'll also be out in various blog posts, and I'm sure Daniel will be able to embed the videos in his documentation on his pages as well. So we want to make this as widely available to everyone as much as we can. So thank you for the questions. We're good to keep going.
Okay. So let's see how some of this stuff works. So first things first, I'm going to fire up Tabular Editor here. Oh, hang on. Let me just get a new instance going here. And so the first time you load Tabular Editor, it just looks something like, hang on. Connection dialog here. Okay, so hang on, let me see if I can find a suitable size for this. So I don't know if the resolution, Mike, if this is good.
It's a little bit small, but I think we can get kind of the gist of what's going on there. Do you have Zoom it by chance? Do you have a little
yeah, I think I actually do. Well, you know what? Just hang on one second.
Yeah, no worries.
Resolution.
Yep, no problem. Yeah, a little bit bigger would be better because it's a little bit small.
Yeah.
You have that high-powered computer that does that very high resolution,
Yeah, and actually, I'm an external monitor right now, so this is probably the issue. Okay, let's do something like this.
Yeah, much clearer. Yeah, this is much bigger. Yep, this is definitely helpful.
Okay, hang on. Let me just try. Okay, so it's better now.
Yeah, it looks much better. It looks a lot bigger there. We can at least see some of the buttons.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so this is sort of the main UI. Once you spin up Tabular Editor, nothing is loaded right now. It's just an empty shell. So the first thing I'm going to do, just for demonstration purposes here, is that I'm actually going to load a tabular model that was previously deployed to an instance of analysis services. And the way I do that is I go to File, I select Open, and then from DB, from Database. And then I get this little dialog here prompting me to put in some connection string for the server that I want to connect to. So in this case, you'll notice that this is actually an Azure Analysis Services instance that I'm connecting to. But this could also have been a Power BI Premium workspace through the XML endpoint. It would work exactly the same. I hit OK. I get presented with a list of, or at least once I log in here. once I log in, I get presented with a list of databases or data sets available on this instance. So let's just choose AdventureWorks. And then you'll see on the left here, the tree sort of gets populated with various objects here. And this is the visual representation of the JSON document that I mentioned earlier. So we'll see at the top node here, I have the model itself, and it contains some basic metadata. There's the name, of course, and then there's a couple of settings, the default language, and various stuff that we can access here. But the interesting bit happens once we expand the little tables node here, because then we get a list of all the tables in this data model. And furthermore, of course, we can expand the tables to see all of the measures in this particular table, followed by all of the columns. And you'll see if some of them has a little blue icon, that's because it's a calculated column. So in that case, we'll see the DAX expression on that column in the editor view up here. And also, if there are any, there can be partitions on the tables. In this case, the table only has a single partition, but it's possible for tables to have multiple partitions as well.
Daniel, can you quickly explain what a partition is for some people who are not familiar with them? Because that's a bit more of an advanced feature.
Yeah, so for those of you that are using incremental refresh policies in Power BI, that's actually when partitions get into play. So sorry about that. The reason I sort of skipped over it is because when you're used to working with analysis services, you have to decide on how you partition your tables and so on. But basically, the partition, think of it as sort of a vertical slicing of the data in each table. So for example, when you're using incremental refresh policies, what actually happens behind the scenes is that Power BI generates a lot of partitions on your model, and each partition will point to the data source, but be limited. So that would typically be a SQL like where clause here, saying, hey, we only want data where the calendar is, I don't know, between 2019, 1st of January, and 2019, 31st of December, something like that. So typically you would have multiple partitions that are, sliced by certain periods of time, because when you refresh your model in order to load data in from the data source, when you have multiple partitions on a table, you can actually control this refresh much more granular than without partitions. So you can actually refresh single partitions on your model. What the incremental refresh feature in Power BI does, it actually generates all of these partitions for you based on the policy that you set up. So for example, it could generate one partition for each of the historical years, and then for the current year, it will probably generate one partition per month, and then, I don't know, for the current month, it'll probably have one partition per day, or however you set up your policy. And then when you run an incremental refresh, it will probably only process or refresh the current month worth of partitions, or however you set it up, meaning this way you can speed up the refresh, as you don't want to refresh your entire historical data set, but only the most recent stuff. And the way it works is actually just by refreshing some of the partitions. Now, of course, once you connect Tabular Editor to your data model, you would actually be able to see exactly which partitions are inside of it, and you'll see how these are structured and how the filter criteria on each partition looks like in order to populate only that partition with data. So that's how it is with the partitions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yes, a lot of us haven't had a lot of time to work on super big data models, and partitions is a newer concept. And I think so. Those of us coming from that SQL background makes a lot of sense about the where clause. That's, we're basically paring down some of the data to a smaller section so we can operate on this. This also, the partitioning in Power BI also allows you to move less data across the wire. So if you have a couple 10 million row data set that you're going to bring in, you don't have to bring in all 10 million rows every single time. You're able to bring in only the last week or 2 days or month of data, and that substantially limits the number of records you have to move across the internet wires to get the data in and out of your data model.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Now, the main issue with that is that as of this moment, there's no way to actually control which partitions get refreshed when you're using Power BI Desktop.
Correct.
But once you published your model to the Power BI service, at least when you're using Power BI Premium, then you can actually go in and specify exactly which partitions you want to refresh, just like you can on analysis services. So if you've designed your own partitioning scheme, and you deploy that or you publish that model to Power BI Premium, then you can control this any way you want.
That's excellent for like restating data. So if you want to restate data for summer of last year, you can just pick the partitions you want to restate and just reload that information. That's excellent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Now, the last type of object that we typically see here below the tables is the hierarchies. So as you know, you can create your own hierarchies, which are basically just groupings of columns in your model. And those show up like this. And of course, we can rearrange objects just like we want to. We can even, drag in new levels and they'll just appear in here. So actually, what I'm showing you now is taking a little head start here. Is some of the fundamental feature of Tabular Editor is that since it works offline, any kind of change that we make here in the UI is just lightning fast. So let's say, for example, that I wanted to group some of these measures into a display folder. Now, in Power BI Desktop, I believe on the modeling view, you should actually be able to multi-select a number of measures and then provide a display folder string. So I think that's actually possible today. So you don't have to go through them one by one. So let's say I put these measures into a new display folder called total amounts. You can see they just show up here. Notice how there's no working on it spinner that we have to wait for while we're making these changes. But now the next thing is what if we wanted to have multiple levels, so nested display folders basically. Well, we can still do that in Power BI Desktop, but we just have to add this little backslash character to make like nested folders that show up like this.
What? Now, I never knew you could do that.
Yeah, you can actually have as many levels as you want.
That's cool.
But the cool thing is with Tabular Editor, it's much more intuitive because you can just select the objects that you want to put into a display folder, and you can just nicely drag them into that folder, and they just appear in there. And you'll see that Tabular Editor sets the display folder string to the value it needed for those objects to appear inside this folder. So this provides a much more easy and intuitive user interface for actually working with these types of objects and move them around and so on. And if I make a mistake, as I told you before, we can just edit, undo folder structure change, and you can see these measures go back where they were a second ago. Also, how many times have you had the need to start with one DAX expression and then build upon that, creating new measures, adding more and more logic along the way? Now, in Power BI Desktop, the only way you can copy a measure is if you actually go in, find the DAX expression of the measure, copy that, being careful not to, when you select everything in the formula bar, you need to be very careful how you drag the cursor, because if you drag it too far, it will actually deselect your current selection, and then a lot of funky stuff happens in the UI. Well, here you can just you don't need to copy just the DAX expression, put the DAX expression into your clipboard. You can actually copy the object itself. So in this case, the measure itself. If I select the measure here in the tree, and I copy it either by going to edit, copy, or by pressing Control-C on my keyboard, it will actually put the definition of this measure into my clipboard. And just to show you how that looks, if I open a text editor here and I paste in what's in my clipboard, you'll see that I just get this JSON code. And this actually represents the measure that I copied. We see here we have the name of the measure, we have the DAX expression, even the format string, and all other kinds of properties that are set on this measure. And that means that if I now paste into Tabular Editor, I can just put this object anywhere I want, even on other tables. So let's go to employee and let's hit paste. And you'll see that now we get a copy of this measure inside the employee table. So you'll notice here that it appended a little 1 to this measure, and that's because measure names are globally unique in a Power BI or in a tabular model. We can't have two measures with the same name. So you'll see, even if I paste it multiple times, it'll just keep incrementing this little counter, but we can add as many of these measures as we want. And of course, I can select multiple objects if that's what I want. So let me select these objects. Let's go to the nested folder and hit Control V, and you'll see it just creates copies of all of these. So all of these intuitive keyboard commands that you're used to working with in other tools like Office, Excel, whatever, Control-C, Control-X, delete, all of that stuff, it just intuitively works, and you can even undo, redo, all of that just works the way you would expect. Now, speaking of the DAX expression, you see we have this expression editor up here on the right side of the screen. It has some basic features, but the main takeaway here is that you still need to know how to write DAX code to fully utilize this. So what I mean by that is that there's no IntelliSense, there's no syntax highlighting. But what it does do is it integrates the DAX formatter, the website that Marco Russo and Alberto Ferrari created. So when you click the little format DAX button up here, you'll see that it nicely rearranges. Let me see if I can find another measure that has some slightly more code on it. So let's take this one, for example, and hit the little format DAX button, and you'll see it adds the spaces and so on according to what the DAX formatter does. I think if we go to these guys down here, I think we might have some that are a little more involved. So this one, for example, clicking the button and you can see it nicely rearranges and formats the DAX code, so it's more readable. It does have a few other benefits as well, but still, if you're new to DAX, then this doesn't really provide much of an improved experience compared to writing the DAX code inside Power BI Desktop. This is due to be improved in later versions of Tabular Editor, although at this point I cannot provide a timeline for that. But a couple of other things that I want to show you inside this editor, little known feature here, is that let's say that, okay, right now we're looking at this particular DAX expression, but let's say we wanted to look at the expression of this particular measure. What we can do is we can just put the cursor somewhere on this measure, and then we can hit this little button, navigate, or we can hit the shortcut key, F12, and then Tabular Editor will just jump over to this particular measure. And we can go, as many steps as we want. We can just, browse until we get to a column or a calculated column. And at that point, if we want to, we can use the little arrow buttons up here to navigate back. So going all the way back to the first measure that we were looking at. So at least this helps navigate a complex tree of DAX expressions that are dependent on one another.
That's really helpful. I like that one a lot. I didn't know, because this feels a lot like you're doing actual programming. I mean, yeah. You're able to jump through and look to definitions of a measure, which is very helpful, especially when you don't know where it's calculated, or if you have multiple measures, you have to walk down to go find where the sum is or something like that.
Exactly, and I can actually do you one better, because if you go to a particular measure and you hit F3, or if you right-click and use the Show Dependencies option here, it'll actually show you the full dependency tree for this particular measure. And you can show it in both directions. So for this particular measure, you can see that, okay, it seems that no other measures reference this particular measure. But we can see that this particular measure references a lot of other objects, and then we can, expand this and go all the way down and see, okay, so ultimately this measure here came from this particular column.
Oh, this is huge.
Yeah, and if you double click any of these, you can use it for navigation as well, so you can find the particular measure wherever it may be located across the tables of your model. So
is that a specific button that you're pressing? I must have missed it. Is there what button did you press to get into that discovery?
Okay, so to show the dependency tree, you just click on an object,
yep.
And then either you can invoke it through the context menu here by right-clicking and choosing Show Dependencies, gotcha. Or you can use the shortcut key, F3 in this case.
Got it.
So this also works at the table level. So if we bring up the dependencies view, we can see if there are any objects that directly reference this table here, sales territory, for example. We can see it's one of them. But once we are on the table, we can also see the relationships. So in this case, we can see that sales territory has a one-to-many relationship to employee, a geography. And unfortunately, one of the downsides of Tabular Editor is that you don't have the diagram view as we do when we switch to the modeling tab in Power BI Desktop. So sure. This is about the best we can do in terms of understanding how tables are related to one another when we're only looking at Tabular Editor. If we scroll up to the top of the tree here, we'll see that there's also this relationships folder here. but this simply just lists all of the relationships in the model as singular objects. And looking at this list, it can be pretty difficult to infer exactly how the various tables are related to one another. So I always prefer, going to a particular table, internet sales, for example, bringing up the dependencies view, choose this option here, show relationships starting from internet sales, and then we can sort of get an idea of, okay, so internet sales is our fact table and it's related to currency, customer, product, promotion, and so on.
Excellent.
The reason that date here is appearing several times is because date is a role-playing dimension on this fact table, and only the active relationship is highlighted, where the inactive relationships is shown in this way where they are toned down.
Excellent.
If you hover over them, you can see exactly which columns are related. So the active relationships is between order date key and date key in this case, and the inactive are on due date key and ship date key. So at least we can get an idea of how the structure of the model works by looking at this. Okay.
Can I jump in there? We have two kind of good questions that kind of talk around this topic before you move on. Someone was asking, does the copy and paste work the same way within a model as it does between models? So if we copy copy a measure out, would you be able to copy that measure to a different model?
Absolutely, and so glad that question was asked. So let me go in here and let's open another model. This time let's open a model from a file. And you'll notice that Tabular Editor can work with two types of files. It can work with BIM files, .bim. These are the files that represent the model metadata when you're building models in analysis services. But then it can also work with PBIT files. So these are the Power BI templates that you can export from inside Power BI desktop. So let me open this AdventureWorks PBIT. We get a little warning here that the template will be opened in read-only mode. The reason for that is that this file does not use the enhanced model metadata, and I'll get back to that in a second. But to work around this limitation, because right now, since it's in read-only mode, we cannot do anything. We cannot paste or edit object names, or this file is completely locked. But if we know what we're doing, we want to work around this limitation, we can go to File, Preferences, and then you see there's this option called Allow Unsupported Power BI Features. So if we put a check mark here, it'll open up the model, basically letting us make any change that is possible to do to the model metadata, same as we did over here. And this will now allow us to edit object names, create new measures, and so on. And of course, it will allow us to take a couple of measures from over here, copy. So I just hit Control-C, but let me just paste it out here. Go over here and hit Control-V, paste, and you'll see the measures appear over here, and they even retain the display folder that they had from the source model. Now, of course, these measures will probably not work unless the tables and columns in this model are exactly identical to where they came from, because otherwise the DAX expressions here will probably be nonsense if the model structure is different. But for those of you that work with many identical models, this is a technique that you can use for migrating measures and objects in general from one model to another.
Excellent. There's one more question on what we got here. Does the DAX formatter highlight syntax errors if there is an error?
No, unfortunately, right now it doesn't. So my best advice for you, if you want to author complex DAX code using Tabular Editor, then what you should do is you should connect to an instance of analysis services one way or another. And one way was what I did here when I loaded the model from database. Let me just do it again. So here I choose which instance of analysis services I want to connect to, or a Power BI Premium dataset if I have access to that. I load the AdventureWorks model from there. And then you'll see it says down here at the bottom, connected successfully. And what this actually means is that whenever I make a change, if I hit the Save button, Control-S, go to File, Save, then it actually saves the changes I made back to this instance of analysis services. And that means that the DAX code that I created is actually validated on the server side. So analysis services will actually validate the DAX code and provide an error message back to me once I hit the save button. So let me illustrate what I mean by this. If, for example, I change one of these measures to something that is nonsense from a DAX point of view, you'll see, so right now I only made the change offline within Tabular Editor, and it shows this little blue question mark icon on this measure that was changed. If I hover over this measure, you'll see that Tabular Editor indicates that the expression was changed, deploy to validate. And basically what that means is the moment I now save this change back to analysis services by clicking this little save button up here, then you see the icon changes into a little warning sign. And this is because now we actually got an error message from analysis services saying, hey, I failed to resolve the name XXXX because, well, it's not a valid table, variable, or function name. So unfortunately, there's no highlighting of where in the DAX expression that we have the error, but by working in connected mode like we are now, it's easy to at least get some kind of error message information, and you'll see that Tabular Editor even puts this little error icon on all the dependent objects, making it easy to identify. Say, okay, apparently we have some issue on sales territory as well. That's on the total product cost, and in this case, it's because total product cost references another measure that has an error, so we can quickly identify the source of our error in this case. And so now I was using analysis services, but I'll show you in a bit. We can also use Power BI Desktop to do exactly the same, to get our DAX expressions validated in the same way. However, this is one of the areas that I'm getting most feedback on. So this is something that I want to improve in a future version of Tabular Editor, so you'll get better syntax highlighting and validation of errors without having to deploy. Okay, I hope that answers the question. Are there
Yes,
any...
it did. Yep, I think that was the great answer. We had one last question that just came in now. So when you're making modification to models, when does the model change actually get pushed back to analysis services? Is it when you're pressing the save button?
Yeah, and exactly that's also what I wanted to illustrate here. The moment I press the save button, the changes get synchronized or pushed back to analysis services, and that's why. As I showed you here, we can make these changes locally or offline within Tabular Editor. It's lightning fast, you know, renaming objects, stuff like that. It only takes a split second and everything just gets updated, you know, even dragging stuff around. But the moment we hit the save button, we have to wait 1 or 2 seconds maybe while analysis services gets updated. And only at that point are the changes reflected in analysis services, and anyone connected to analysis services or any visuals in your Power BI model needs to get refreshed to sort of show the updates based on the changes that you made. But that only happens once you hit the save button. And actually, that's the main advantage of Tabular Editor compared to other tools, because this puts you in control of when you want this synchronization to happen. Because the standard tool for working with tabular models, SSDT, Visual Studio, and also Power BI Desktop, they synchronize the underlying analysis service database every time you make a change. So whenever you change a description or a format string or any property of any object in your model, this synchronization happens all the time, and that's where you get the little working on it spinner on your screen. So at least with Tabular Editor, you can make as many of these changes as you want across your entire model, and only when you're ready to synchronize and are happy to wait a couple of seconds for the synchronization to happen, you can click the save button and it'll get synchronized for you.
Perfect. That's great. All right. I think that answers all the questions. You're good to kind of keep cruising.
Cool. So I think this sort of covers most of the basic UI features. Let me just once more load this model in here. Just want to make sure that I don't miss any of the important UI features here. Yeah, so for an analysis service model or Power BI premium dataset, you can make sort of any change that is possible on a tabular model. And most of the changes that you typically make can be invoked from the context menu. So you would find yourself using the right-click button a lot, working with this tree. because here you'll see some of the most commonly used actions that you want to make on your tree. For example, if you wanted to hide a number of tables, you just right click, choose make invisible, and it'll set the hidden property to true. It's also very easy to create new objects. So if I select a certain table, promotion, for example, I can create a new measure and it will turn up inside this table. But you'll see there are also other objects here to create calculated columns, hierarchy between two columns in your model. The way you do that is, let me just go ahead and delete one of the existing relationships here. So let me go to internet sales and remove the relationship between products. So some people use this option here, but I recommend against that, because then you'd have to go to the property grid over here on the right and try to locate the columns that you want to relate to one another. And this can actually be pretty difficult if this list is large. So instead, what I recommend you to do if you want to create a new relationship is go to the fact table from where the relationship should start. Locate the column on which the relationship should be created. Right click, choose create new, relationship 2, and then select the table to which you want to relate this particular column. So in this case, it was the product table, and we want to relate it to the product key column on the product table. Click here, and immediately the relationship gets created for us in this case. Now, for those of you that are new to tabular modeling, be aware that some of the changes that you can make to a tabular model will actually require refreshing the model afterwards. For example, when you create a new relationship, or if you add a calculated column or a calculated table to your model, you will have to refresh the model to get those populated with data. For measures, any change that you make to a measure with the DAX expression or the format string or the display folder, you actually don't need to refresh. So for measures, you're free to make any kind of change that you want, and once you save, Power BI should just reflect the change immediately. And this is actually also one of the reasons why initially when Desktop gets this new external tool integration feature, this is why initially we're only going to allow making changes to certain objects. Initially it's going to be measures, perspectives, translations, and calculation groups. And in fact, speaking of calculation groups, I think I'm just going to, because we're actually starting to run out of time here a little bit. So let me go into Power BI Desktop just to illustrate this for you. Let's fire out a new instance of Power BI Desktop here. And while this is loading, are there any new questions, Mike?
Let me just quickly glance through here. Oh, someone asking, after we commit, is there an ability to undo? So,
right. So yeah, okay, good question. So the undo stack within Tabular Editor is retained even after you commit. So as long as you still have Tabular Editor running, you can still undo and go back to the state that your model was in when you first loaded it into Tabular Editor. But if you happen to close Tabular Editor, then I'm afraid that there won't be any option to go back. So in that case, I recommend saving the model to disk as a model.bin file or something like that to make sure that you have the original metadata.
And this is a good plug for, make sure you come back on Friday when we start talking about DevOps and how to manage your model in chunks. So I think that'll kind of be, this will be a good topic around that. Is, once you have a model, you need to be able to code manage it. So stay tuned. There'll be more about that as well. Again, we'll have all the links at the end of this webinar, and we'll be posting them on Twitter as well to make sure people can see them. But we'll talk more about this later on this week.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on to Power BI Desktop. What I want to show you here is that I have a pretty simple model here. You can see it just contains a couple of tables, nothing fancy here. And what I want to show you here is that just for now, just ignore this little external tools ribbon up here. I know Christian Wade presented this this last week, but just to show those of you who don't have this option yet, which none of you probably have because it's a new feature that hasn't shipped yet. In order to access the data model behind Power BI Desktop, what you can do today is when you launch Tabular Editor, and just launching it the regular way after you've installed it. When you go to File, Open from Database, you'll see that in addition to specifying the server name of an analysis services instance, you can also choose the little local instance drop down here. and you'll see that it actually detects that an instance of Power BI Desktop is running, and it has this AdventureWorks PBIX file loaded. So let me try to connect to that. Again, now I'm getting this warning because I enabled the experimental Power BI features. Let me go just to show you what would normally happen if you have the default setting, which would be like this. So let me load the model once again. Then it will actually just load the model without giving any warning of any kind. And we can see here exactly the same model that we are currently looking at in Power BI Desktop. Now, in order for this to work, I mentioned a moment ago that you have to enable the enhanced model metadata. And what that means is you have to make sure that you go into options within Power BI Desktop, and you select this little preview feature here called store datasets using enhanced metadata format. Because this will actually upgrade your PBIX file so the JSON file, JSON document that I showed you earlier, this will get upgraded to a model that is more compatible with what Analysis Services normally uses. So once this is checked, this will let Tabular Editor make certain kinds of changes to the model once you connect to it. And now the kind of changes we can make are still kind of limited, as I mentioned before. So for example, now we no longer have the option of creating new tables. That's not an option anymore. You'd have to still do that through Power BI Desktop. However, we can add measures, and that actually works quite well. And we can even add as many as we want. And you'll notice, so if I expand the employee button here, you'll notice that once I save these, once I click the save button, we should see that the new measures that I created, they just show up in the field list. Now this automatic refresh of the field list doesn't happen with the current version of Power BI Desktop, but you can sort of get the same behavior by going to the Home tab and clicking the refresh button after you make a change in Tabular Editor. But my main point here was to show you that even if I make some nonsense DAX code, if I put something in here that is invalid DAX, and I hit the save button, I still get the little error message that I got that I showed you before when working with Analysis Services, and that's because, as I said earlier, Power BI Desktop is just running Analysis Services under the hood, and that's actually what Tabular Editor is communicating with here. So once this version of Power BI Desktop is shipped, that has the external tools integration, you'll also be able to use this new feature, which allows you to create these fantastic calculation groups inside your Power BI models. For those of you who don't know what calculation groups are, these are objects that let you reuse the same DAX logic across multiple measures. So for example, time intelligence, if you want to have year-to-date calculations, year-over-year, rolling 12 months, all of that stuff, you can put that in a calculation group, and then the DAX logic will apply to all of the measures across your model, instead of having to add them to every single measure. For those of you that will join the webinar, I think it was it tomorrow or Thursday, we are going to be talking about scripting.
Tomorrow is scripting.
Yeah, I'm going to show you some other tricks that you can use to quickly generate many of these time intelligence measures if you don't have access or don't want to use the calculation group feature for one reason or another.
So I threw some links into the chat window for those who are watching. There is a link to Analysis Services Tabular Editor calculation groups and a great article from SQL BI around introducing calculation groups. SQL BI absolutely loves calculation groups and thinks this is one of the major changes coming to DAX here in the near future that is just going to really revolutionize how people build and create time calculations. So really good thing that this is coming to Power BI Desktop, and as well now we can use this with Tabular Editor as well.
Yeah. Right. Just to make sure that we covered most of the UI features. So we already saw how we can use the Explorer tree to work with display folders, multi-select, drag and drop, copy paste. That's the context menu. One thing I forgot to show you is that Tabular Editor allows you to localize your models. So if you have If you want to serve, and I know Kristen Wade actually showed this feature as well on the webinar last Thursday, but if you want to support multiple languages, then you can actually add those as translations in the model metadata. So since we're running out of time, I'm just going to do it really quick here, just choosing some kind of other languages, and you can add as many of these translations to your model as you want. Then what you do in Tabular Editor is you simply select the translation that you want to work with. So let's work with Danish in my case. And then I can just, hang on, I need to probably enable this feature once again. Then we can just rename these objects. So let me use the Danish word for employee. And you'll see now the name here turns blue. And this the blue tint indicates that there's a translation going on here. We'll name this internet set. It's also Danish, and then you can switch back and forth between the original names and the translated names. And again, you could have as many different languages here as you wanted to. And then once these are deployed to Power BI and deployed to the Power BI service, then they will actually be observed by the client. So based on the language settings inside the Power BI service, it will actually observe these translations and display the model metadata, the field list, using the translated names of all the objects. So that's another thing that is very easy to work with in Tabular Editor, and you get to actually see what the translated names are, how the end user would view the data set when they connect to it. So you get this, what you see is what you get experience. Right. We saw how we can edit properties in the property grid, use undo, redo. We saw the DAX editor that integrates with DAX formatter, how we have the dependency tree. We can view the dependencies between measures and so on. We can go to definition by pressing F12 to look at another measure that's being referenced. And the last feature that I'm not going to go over today is how we import tables, because that's not that relevant to Power BI Desktop, since it's one of the features that's not going to be available, at least not in the near term. But for those of you that are interested, there are other videos. There's another video on YouTube where I'm actually going through these features and also showing this import table wizard. Especially for analysis services, it's very practical. For Power BI, there will be some limitations because Power BI is using Power Query connectors, and those don't work quite well with Tabular Editor. So for now, just keep that stuff out of it. Use the regular Power Query inside Desktop when you want to add a new table, and just use Tabular Editor for all the fine tuning with measures and all of this stuff.
That's a great question. So someone actually, you just addressed the question we had. Someone was asking about how can you show or tell what we can do with Power Query code inside Tabular Editor. Do you have the ability of just showing us a copy paste of something that's some M language that we would drop in there, and where would that go?
So this instance of Tabular Editor here was connected to this instance of Power BI Desktop. And as you can see, if I go to a table in this case and I go down to a partition, you can see that the M code for this particular table is actually located right here inside the partition. And actually, you can change the M code here, and it actually works, but this is one of the things that will not be supported. So the main issue here would be if you make a change to the M code that would require adding or removing columns from the table, then that probably doesn't work, and I guess Power BI Desktop will probably crash. But minor things, for example, if you add a filter or something that would only change the data and not the structure of the data itself, then it is probably going to work just fine. Although just keep in mind it's still not supported, but maybe you can still have some advantage just by being able to look at the M expressions behind the tables by going in here. Hopefully later on this is some of the stuff that we'd be able to have full support for editing this stuff in Tabular Editor. But in the short term, it's only going to be measures, calc groups, perspectives, and translations.
So in general guidance there then would be, if you're going to try to edit the tables or the data that's making up a table, you want to try and do that in SSDT, or you want to do that in Power BI to modify those tables initially, and then point Tabular Editor at the data model once it's already been changed from a Power Query standpoint.
Yeah. So for a pure analysis services model, I would generally recommend people not to use the Power Query data sources and instead use the what we call the legacy data providers, which are basically just OLEDB or ODBC data sources. That's what I had in the model I showed you earlier on, where instead of having any Power Query stuff in here, it's just regular SQL statements being executed on each partition directly against my my SQL Server data source, because those are fully supported in Tabular Editor. And for these kind of data sources, we can even launch this import table wizard that will preview all the tables that I have on my SQL Server, and making it very easy for me to import new tables, just by clicking the ones I want here and clicking the import button, and we see the new tables get added inside my model with a select star partition. But this stuff, none of this stuff will work for Power BI models in the near term, since Power BI are not using the legacy data sources, but are instead relying on the Power Query stuff.
Great answer. Yep, perfect. I think we've got a couple other, one more other question, and then we'll probably wrap it up here.
Yeah.
How does this work if you're connected to a Power BI file that is already connected to an analysis services or a SQL Server analysis services tabular model? Yeah. What modification will you need to be, will you be able to see? Or is this more of a, should I not connect to the Power BI model, right? And should I just instead connect to the SQL Server analysis services instead?
So great question. So if you have a Power BI file that is using Live Connect to analysis services, then you won't be able to connect at all to the PBIX file, and that's because for PBIX files running in Live Connect mode, you don't have an instance of analysis services running on your machine at all. It just, you're only able to work with the visuals. I know you can create measures in a PBIX file like that, but those are report level measures, which are not stored in this metadata format. So it's not like you're actually working with a model. You're just redirecting everything to the source analysis services, and for that reason, you won't be able to connect to such a PBIX file at all. So your PBIX file has to be running in import or direct query or composite model mode for you to be able to connect.
Excellent, sounds good. And I think with that, we are almost out of question. Okay, one other question. Sorry, one just came in.
Take as many questions as there are.
Sure. This is the last one. So I think that, again, I want to be respectful of your time. We are right at time now. It's been a full hour, so I definitely thank you very much for this. But we'll get this last question here before we cut it off. So the last question here is, we have is the ODBC a native query?
Come again, please. Is ODBC a native query?
Yeah, is a ODBC connection a native query, or will we be able to use that in Tabular Editor to connect to an ODBC connection?
Right. So if you're talking about a model running on analysis services, or I guess also in the Power BI Premium service, well, actually they'd probably use a different different techniques for authentication and that kind of stuff. But at least for analysis services, you can add a new data source to a model. And that data source can definitely use ODBC drivers if that's what you wanted to do.
Sounds good. Yeah. So the native ODBC drivers are supported in the native queries, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. It is supported. Perfect. Just replying back to that one. All right, excellent. And with that, we are out of questions. Thank you everyone for attending. Definitely thank you, Daniel, for taking time out of your busy day to go ahead and work with us. If there's any additional questions here, hit Daniel's questions here on tabulareditor.com. That's where you can go get this tool. There are suggestions, so if you have any suggestions or issues or comments you want to make to the tool, please visit the GitHub location here as well. So I'll leave that up here just for a little bit so people can get in touch with Daniel. We will be, just to reiterate, there's been a lot of questions around, this is great content. We want to be able to get our hands on it. This will all be published on YouTube. We'll broadcast this stuff as much as we can. So stay tuned for, the videos will hopefully make it to tabulareditor.com, powerbi.tips.com, and then we'll also put it on the Power BI Tips YouTube channel to make sure as many people as we can get to understand this information. This is going to be huge, and especially, all of the hundreds of thousands of users using Power BI Desktop, this will be immensely helpful, especially when Tabular Editor can go edit Power BI Desktop files directly. It's going to be a huge win. So thank you very much, Daniel, for your time. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and we'll talk to you guys soon.